Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm Jose.
And today we've seen The Zone of Interest. This was actually a press screening organised by Lee Nabs at the Mockingbird Cinema.
Yes, thank you very much.
We're very grateful for. First of all, actually, before we get into the film, can I say we've been to the Mockingbird once or twice before, but not for a while. We saw Jay and Silent Bob reboot there, remember, and there was a great crowd. It's a very small cinema in the Custard Factory. It seats probably less than 80 people. But the quality of the projection, astonishing. This film's been shot digitally, it's been shot on spherical lenses, you get all this amazing clarity, and although it's, a small screen and that sort of thing, the images, compared to all the complaints that we've had recently about the image quality at Cineworld, the IMAX screen they're notwithstanding, although I'd say even then, this is better than the IMAX. Really. The clarity, I mean, the IMAX obviously has scale going for it, and that's a whole other thing. But the clarity and the brightness of the image that we had today, I thought was just astonishing.
It was very good. And I'd happily go a lot more. I mean, the only thing, and it's a problem in Birmingham throughout, is that they tend to program the same films that are being programmed elsewhere. And if you have a Cineworld pass, you're not going to pay to see it somewhere else. So, what I would hope for, encourage, wish for is, and I understand that sometimes they have to program the big blockbuster films because they need to make money, but if they could just distinguish their programming a bit more than they already do from Cineworld, I would definitely kind of go there, because it's a great place. It's got a cafe, the Custard Factory had a nice ambiance, it's a place that you could kind of sit comfortably and read a book before you're screening. I mean, there's so many things to like about it, and the only negative is that the programming coincides too much with Cineworld.
Yeah. So let's talk about this film in particular, The Zone of Interest. I've been looking forward to this since seeing the trailer. It looked so interesting. It's written and directed by Jonathan Glazer, who's previously made Sexy Beast, Birth, and Under the Skin. So his last film was 2013. We haven't seen any of his films on the podcast before. Personally, I've had a kind of on-off relationship with how much I get on with his films, I do think he's extremely original, though. I mean, his films, like the genres he goes into, he treats them in ways that you don't see other people doing it, I think.
I love his films, and actually I taught Under the Skin for a few years. It's a fascinating film. It's just they're difficult watches, It's like, I don't know, if you could make some kind of comparison, it's like, reading a literary novel as opposed to a generational opus or something, right? It's kind of, the audience's pleasure is not its primary goal, yeah? The audience's thinking, is, or a particular type of experiences, but not really its pleasures. So, and that can be off-putting. I mean, whilst we were watching the film, my thinking was, I'm so glad that I'm seeing it here, because, I think it's really great. But I'm sure had I watched it on my TV, I don't know if I'd have been able to get through it, just because it's a bit slow, it's a bit static, it really makes you look and listen.
It requires your concentration.
Yeah, and I don't think I would have been able to give it at home.
Yes, it's not that sort of film.
Yeah.
It's based on the novel of the same name by Martin Amis. Jonathan Glazer was apparently interested in this novel before it even came out, from having heard about the kind of thing it would be about. And from what I understand, there's rather a departure from the novel in the film, in that the novel is based on the life of Rudolf Höss, not Rudolf Höss, who was the deputy Führer who got himself arrested in Scotland like a twat. This is Rudolf Höss, who ran Auschwitz, and he lived in a house that bordered it, and we see this. It's not the exact house; it's a replica, but it's you see Auschwitz in the background all the time behind this lovely bucolic pastoral garden.
Yeah.
The novel is based on him, but all the characters' names are different, and there's a love triangle and things, and this has all been removed for this, right? So we are talking about Rudolf Höss by name here. This is much more. This is treating its subject much more as a historical document, and there's no love triangle, nothing like that. And in fact, although there is obviously story and plot, it's not the driving forced. This is observational. So I was reading that Jonathan Glazer set up a lot of cameras in this house, kind of locked them off, and 10 at a time, and said, "You go about your lives." Right? Jonathan Glazer, I think, used the phrase, "It's like we treated it like a Nazi Big Brother," something like that, right? And so, I mean, I don't think you even. I could be wrong about this. I don't think you even see a camera pan at any point.
I don't remember one.
There's a couple of tracks, but the film is aesthetically defined by locked off tripod shots that are dispassionate observers of what they're seeing.
The scale is interesting as well, because it's not quite, the plan again. It's not quite mid-length. It's almost like these characters are surrounded by their environment. They are, almost an environment that they're largely oblivious to. But the scale of the film is interesting as well. It's slightly dislocating. The characters always move in the space. The space surrounds them.
Yes, the shots are typically reasonably wide angle, although not distortively so. I mean, we recently saw Poor Things, for instance, where like the fisheyiness is part of the charm and the appeal. It's not what's going on here, but it's about getting a wide view of what you're seeing, and it's kind of unstylized, if you like. And I think it's interesting that I don't think at any point you enter Auschwitz. I could be wrong about that. You stay outside.
You only enter Auschwitz at the very end of the film when we see the cleaners clean the museum.
There's that modern day segment. But in terms of what's set at the time, I don't remember going into Auschwitz at all. This is about being set outside Auschwitz, being seen next door to Auschwitz. And a lot of people, I think, will talk about the idea of the banality of evil, which is so often what people talk about with, when it comes to the horrors of the Holocaust, because that's what Hannah Arendt wrote about during the Nuremberg trials, and about I forget who it was specifically, who the Nazi who was on trial, who she was it Eichmann? I can't remember who it was.
Eichmann.
It was Eichmann.
Because I think, didn't she also write something called Eichmann in Jerusalem?
Right.
Yeah.
And the idea was that the idea of the banality of evil was that this wasn't, to Eichmann's mind, the way it came across in his kind of testimony, it wasn't an active evil. It was a process. It was a business. It was something he was told to do. It was thoughtless.
I think this film is not quite like that. I think this film has a judgment on it.
So I agree, it's not quite like that, and it's not making exactly the same point, but I think people will see a relationship with that idea. The idea that you're having your birthday parties, you're raising your kids in your back garden, you're having your mum over. Across a wall covered in barbed wire are these huts where Jews are being worked to death and killed. And throughout the film, apart from those moments where you get to Berlin, or near Berlin, I forget the name of the town.
Oranienburg.
Where Höss is forced to relocate for a time. When you're in and around Auschwitz, the sound, there's this constant, sometimes it's high level, sometimes it's low level, but there's this constant rumble, hum, it's industrial. It's the furthest you get from it is when you get down by the river and you can still hear it there.
The sound
constantly
design,
running under everything, this industrial sound of Auschwitz behind everything.
The sound design is amazing. I mean, there's that close-up of the lead from below at one point in full kind of uniform with a skull on his...
I think you maybe are actually in Auschwitz at that point. Maybe that one shot.
Except you don't see it because it's just a close-up.
Yeah, that's maybe it.
But that's the moment where Auschwitz comes into force, because the close-up is just of his face and his uniform, right? But you hear people screaming, you hear shots, and all of a sudden you realize this is a disembarkment from the trains, right? And it's amazing the power of the film to just kind of communicate that without showing anything, right? It's all done orally.
Yeah, there is a score written by Michael Levi, but you hear almost none of it, right? A lot of it was discarded, I think. So the film opens on a black screen, during which some of this score, this kind of disquieting, odd score, is being played for a minute or two. But once the film starts proper, you don't hear any of that, and it plays throughout the credits as well at the end. And I think maybe that moment No, actually, I don't think so. When the screen goes completely red after you've been looking at all the flowers and the screen goes completely red, actually the sound drops out at that point, and you do hear some odd sound design at that point. You hear sounds of pain, I think, but I don't think score comes into it at that point. So that again contributes to this dispassionate feeling. It's not a film that's aesthetically kind of juicing what it's showing you, right? It's objective, I guess. Like how objective fiction is kind of debatable, but it doesn't play as something that is, like I say, juicing it. It's not selling
It's not
you,
manipulating you into feeling. That's for sure.
Exactly.
It's kind of dispassionate and observant.
But that opening, I think, is really interesting, and it's crucial because that's the film setting its scene orally. It's not doing it with any visuals at that point. It's with sound alone. It is giving you. It's I don't know. It's like it's setting your mood and your heart rate. It's very important that it's doing that right at the start.
It's quite amazing, I think, because it begins just with a family on a Sunday outing. It looks like on the river, and it's all kind of beautiful and pristine, and the water and the forest and the sky, right? That's how it begins, and then the film very gradually begins to introduce kind of discordant notes, right?
Yeah.
The people working, which I initially thought, must be Jewish workers, though the wife is very clear to say no, kind of, they're all local girls, all the Jews are on the other side of the fence, she says.
That's what she says.
That's what she says.
That's what she tells her mother.
Ah.
Yeah, no, I think this is... Because I noticed that too, and I was questioning it, and I think the thing with her mother coming to visit, her mother doesn't understand the full extent of what her son-in-law does and what her daughter is complicit in, and indeed what her country is complicit in, really.
Well, I think she does, because there's that there's that thing. Oh, I wonder if Mrs. Lieberman is over there.
Well,
right?
this is why I use the phrase "full extent." There's some knowledge.
I bid on her curtains and lost.
Yes,
right?
exactly. So there is that, but she also leaves. She is shocked to see Auschwitz, the camp beyond the wall.
She is.
And she's the one who is reminiscing. She remembers Esther, whoever it was, Esther Silberman or something. Although again, she, as you say, she goes on to say, I bid on her curtains. There is this acceptance of, or some degree of understanding of.
And there's more than that, because there was this thing. I used to clean her house, and basically it's now look at her and look at us.
Yes.
Like we beat the Jew, basically.
Yes,
It's
but I also think it's
being expressed there.
But I also think it's the case that she is shocked.
She is. She leaves.
And that's why she leaves. And I think that's why her daughter tells her that because she asks, Jews in the house? And the daughter says, no, these are local girls. And clearly they're not. Clearly they're not. I mean, they're absolutely not. I mean, we get so many shots that tell us that they're Jews who've been repurposed from the camp, let's say. The thing about cleaning up the bathtub after all the human remains have gone into the river and got all over the kids, and they scrub and wash them. And the one girl, the Jewish girl who's working in the house, scrubs the bath, and you don't see what's in the bath actually. I mean, you have seen a shot before, but you see a shot of her face reacting to it, and we know that's what she's looking at, the remains of her people. There's a thing about, in fact, it's much clearer even later on when the wife tells her, I could have my husband
incinerate you.
Send your ashes to wherever it is. So it's absolutely clear. She's telling her mother that.
Well, for me, there was a doubt because, Polish people were under occupation, and kind of they would have been, under threat and of similar kinds, really. So it wasn't clear to me. I took her word for it. Right. Though initially, kind of when you see the workmen, I thought, oh, so these are Jewish prisoners working the garden. Was my thinking, but then like I couldn't, they weren't wearing.
Your quote unquote, your typical Nazi, not Nazi,
the uniform,
the Auschwitz stripes.
So I was uncertain, and then the other. The dialogue to the mother saying, the Jews are on the other side, is kind of what made me think, oh, okay, well, that's interesting, and it increased my doubt. And then the threat, I could have my husband incinerate you and throw your ashes, I mean, I took that as a moment where her full complicitness in what was happening is revealed, with a harshness and cruelty. Really, she is a wicked woman, right? And she knows exactly what's happening, right? But I didn't take it to mean that she was necessarily addressing a Jewish woman. She was just addressing somebody who was so much under her power, and that could include a local peasant girl, but
to me it is absolutely clear.
Okay, I'm sure you're right.
Although I think it is, there's also something interesting, I suppose, in the idea that the line between Jewish and non-Jewish is not always absolutely clear. And I don't mean in terms of like I'm raised Jewish and I'm Jewish and I would just say that I'm Jewish. But it's a question of when a Nazi is trying to work out if you're Jewish or not, it just comes down to their opinion. It can be what you look like. There's that Louis Theroux documentary, which I think a lot of people will be familiar with, where he's hanging out with neo-Nazis in America. And Louis Theroux's not Jewish, but this one neo-Nazi whose garage he's in sharing a beer identifies him as Jewish. And because he won't say, I'm not Jewish, he'd be like throwing Jews under the bus doing that. He said like his producer's Jewish, and I didn't want to, it felt wrong to sort of deny it, even though a denial would have been accurate. Because this guy says, I think you're Jewish. I think you're Jewish and I want you out of my house. There's nothing sort of you can do about that. So I suppose it would be interesting if this girl was not Jewish from the camps, and was a Pole who still, you could say, even knowingly, you could say, well, I'm going to just say you're Jewish, and then I can have you killed. That's kind of interesting, but I don't think that's what's going on here.
Right.
I think the film is so interesting, but as you say, it is also slow, and it's about kind of long-term observation of the way of life in this house, and the kind of the domesticity in it compared to what we know is going on over the wall, though we don't see it. But we see occasional statues. We get, for instance, flames coming out of the chimney.
Okay, and well, actually, there's a progression in
yes.
that, right? So initially, you see nothing and you hear nothing, and then little by little, the film builds up. Yeah, kind of the noises. 3/4 of the way through the film, the red smoke of the chimneys becomes almost like a constant image. You see them through windows, through the house, right? So it becomes kind of harder and harder to deny kind of what's happening, around. And that this woman's idea, or this, because I think it is, well, the woman calls it paradise, maybe it's the mother who calls it paradise, but the woman agrees, right, is right next to, somebody else's version of hell, right? Like kind of, they're side by side, one side pretending the other isn't there. And so kind of, the film begins to build up, and all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, little by little, this family that's just shown as an archetypal, loving, idyllic, family in the country, on a Sunday in the country, all of a sudden becomes kind of complicit in all the murderousness and kind of that takes place, right? So you see her distributing the clothes, you see her with the fur coat, she talks about a diamond having fallen out of her toothpaste and how she's ordering more. She knows exactly where these things are coming from,
yes.
Right? And then also the husband, who seems like really nice and, reads his children's stories and, is clearly besotted by his wife, but you also see him taking advantage of, you see him with a prostitute, basically, who is also...
Yeah, well, prostitute is putting... he's raping a prisoner from the camp.
Yeah. Again, those things, that's almost like the logical way of thinking, except it wasn't clear to me. Yeah, because, again, she appears, with the high heels and the purse and... and she seems healthy and long hair and those are not the images that you would associate. But again, kind of certainly it's a thought that comes to you.
I think it's interesting that there is ambiguity in this, because I think you're right. Because when I say it seems absolutely obvious to me, it did, but there's also good reason to have these doubts that you had about who these people are or exactly what the relationships are and so on. Because I think that kind of plausible deniability, you might call it, is kind of built into. I mean, for instance, the name "The Zone of Interest," right, is one of these kind of classic Nazi kind of non-names, right? The Zone of Interest was the name for the 40, I think, square kilometre region around Auschwitz. Now, to any kind of normal person, that's not a zone of interest, right? That's something much worse than what that name implies. But that's kind of built in. It's built into the film's title, and it's built into all of these things. I mean, it's interesting that the film is a 12A, despite what we've just described as a rape scene, because you don't see anything. What you see is implied, and it's clear what the relationship. Because after it, you also see him washing his genitals, and washing them with the same kind of intensity that they wash their kids after being in the river with all the ashes and the bones that have been discarded. So you put those things together. It's clear, I think, that she's Jewish and he's washing himself after having raped her, but it's shown in such a way that you could. Do you remember that film we saw, the Iranian film? Was it Permission, about the women's football team? We saw it at the Mac, and you led a discussion afterwards. And there was a scene in it where it's a rape is implied, and then you see the woman scrubbing her teeth intently afterwards. And again, it's like you haven't been shown this, and if you don't want to see it, you don't have to see it. But if you are cognizant of what that implies, then you see it, and that's similar here, right? And
you see it in different ways, because actually, so I was thinking, they have sex, and then you say, and she was raped, and of course it is a rape. I mean, if it's involuntary, it's a rape. So I think, even those perceptions kind of, alter with knowledge and context.
But it's also, I think what you're getting at there is that the word rape implies perhaps something more violent, more forceful than you're necessarily seeing, which you're not here. It's
you see nothing.
Yes. What the amount to which you see anything is her coming in, taking off her shoes, and it's what she's there for. As opposed to something that she is resisting or what have you.
I think it's an amazing film. I mean, it's kind of so powerful, kind of, because it reveals all the power gradations. It reveals people's unwillingness to acknowledge whilst being fully cognizant of the benefits they reap and wanting to reap more. I'll order more toothpaste. There might be more diamonds in it. The terrifying power relations between, this housewife who seems like a nice little housewife with, all her curls in her hair and, tied up with pins and so on. And yet kind of, the underlying kind of fascistic brutality behind her. It's kind of, an amazing performance, I think, from Sandra Huller.
Apparently the dog is her own dog as well, the actress is.
Yes, I mean, and the dog is important. It kind of, it comes flying in as part of the family. It's lively and so on. And, just behind it, there are kind of people being gassed, right?
It's something very bourgeois about the family. It's not just any old family. There's something about it's about the the introduction to the family is built around taking the spoils, as it were, the loot from Jewish women who've been taken to the camps, and pick something nice that you want. And there's a discussion of the dress that someone picked that was 2 sizes too small, but I'll get into it. I love this dress. The lipstick that she finds in the pocket of the mink coat. It's built around that kind of the things that we're able to have, the beautification, and then you get all these shots of the beautiful garden. It's all in bloom, the close-ups of the roses and the ivy, and
the central heating.
We've grown some ivy to cover up the wall to the to the camp, and then there's also this kind of ongoing plot with Rudolf Höss, the commandant, about his promotion and how this promotion is not going to be a good thing for the family because he's going to have to move and the wife doesn't want it and so on. But it's also a promotion in which he becomes the overseer of all the camp commandants, and that's like it's a job progression thing. And I think the film comes alive in a certain way after having been, as we've said, kind of slow. When he goes to the town, I forget, but near Berlin, and he's at the meeting of all those commandants, because that is such a business meeting. I laughed, so I think I was the only person who laughed in the cinema at any point. It's not a very funny film, but I think it is a funny line when you've got the one guy, whoever it is, who's leading the meeting in that room full of camp commandants, and he praises a guy for having been promoted because he met all his labour targets, and he says, "I get fan mail from CEOs about this guy." Like, that is a funny line, right? And it's about, and it's like, this is business, right? And then you go into Höss leading. I maybe am pronouncing his name all the time, but I keep saying Höss. He then takes over the meeting, and it's the agenda, right? Point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, and and of course these is how these meetings would be run. It's like natural to do it that way, but it's also quite pointed that this just reads like a business meeting. It's a business meeting about how we're going to execute the final solution of killing every Jew on earth.
Well, I mean, that particular meeting is about the 700,000 Hungarians.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, who are coming. But there's a previous meeting to that in Höss's house.
Yes.
If you remember, it's kind of, he
Right
takes his boots off, they don't. And then the language is almost like American military language, actually, right? Collateral damage, things like that. So they're talking about units being transported. And of course, each unit is a person, right? And so, you can dehumanize kind of the fact that actually what you're transporting is people, and you're transporting them to kill them by using this other language, right? So it becomes kind of a logistical kind of, problem of industry and efficiency and so on. Yeah, yes. And kind of you eliminate anything human from it, which, I'm sure is the only way that they could go on with that kind of thing. But that was a very chilling meeting. And then the film is so subtle that it gets kind of echoed through the rest of the film. Yeah, because you say, okay, well, just like there's this camp, and then you'll hear at the meeting, and there's that camp and that camp and that camp and that camp, and then you'll see maps with all the camps. Yeah, kind of, with black marks on it. I mean,
because Auschwitz is the best known, but there were dozens of these places.
So the kind of the chillingness and the horror kind of builds in very subtle ways like this, I think.
At that meeting at the start as well, in his home office, they're also talking about an improvement or a new crematorium facility, and we see a diagram of it, and the whoever the character is, I don't know, describes the prisoners come in here 400 or 500 at a time, and he's corrected, it's closer to 500. They're burned at 1,000 degrees, and by that time this other chamber has gone down to 40 degrees, and they moved into there, and you can get rid of the ash, and they're talking about the efficiency. You can keep this going constantly, and that word is, it maybe doesn't say constantly, but like it's some perpetual or something like that. And of course that I also kind of kept that stayed in my head when I was thinking about the audio, which is itself constant. It's always there, but that description of the crematorium facility made me think of an engine, and the way he's describing the 4 stages of intake, burning. It reminded me of the way a 4-stroke internal combustion engine works. I forget it's colloquially known as suck, squeeze, bang, blow, which is how the fuel comes in and it's exploded and it's moved out, and it's this efficient 4-stage process. It's basically the same thing that they're describing here, but not with fuel, with people. It really made me think of that. So the film also really reminded me, as you might expect, of my 2 trips to Auschwitz. Not many Jews can say they've been to Auschwitz twice. I'm one of them.
I went with you on one of them.
Yes, you went with me on the second one. So I went when I was 18, after school. A couple of friends and I went around Europe. And it wasn't quite what that sounds like, although there was fun and everything. But we wanted to learn, and we went to Auschwitz. And it was kind of shocking. But it was only when I went the second time, 10 years later, with you and with Matt, that I really learned the most important thing about Auschwitz, I think, for me at least, which was how industrial it was. Because we have this knowledge of the million Jews that were killed there, and also on top of that, Romani, homosexuals. So many people, Jews were the bulk. and then there's the liberation, and there's images of the crematoria having been exploded and destroyed and that sort of thing, which the Nazis did themselves as they were trying to escape. And you get this thing about like in the ether, Auschwitz survivors. People did survive Auschwitz, but what I didn't understand until the second time I went there with more perspective and all that, was that you didn't survive Auschwitz unless you had only just got there when it was liberated.
That's what I learned.
Yeah,
that was my main.
You
lesson.
you didn't live there a long time, and that's why this was industrial. And we see things like discussion of this in a sense in the film when they're talking about the 20% of Jews who will be used for work, and the 80% who will be.
But they were only used until they starved to death.
Exactly.
Right.
You weren't kept there and fed.
Yeah.
You were used up.
Exactly, and it was very interesting because at the end of the film, they show the museum and they have all these pictures of people. Right, and that's kind of when I clocked it, right? Because it'll have the picture, the name of the person when they arrived in Auschwitz and when they died, and it basically was a 3-month period that they survived. Yeah, everybody died more or less around 3 months. I mean, you might find a few 6 months or whatever, but actually it was uncanny. Right, how kind of people were used up until they died, basically, and those were the 20% that that were not incinerated right at the beginning.
I mean, there's a thing about the one character who wants that 20% is worried that he won't even get his 20% because Höss is so efficient or what have you that he'll just kill them all. He wants to make sure he skims off the top the ones that he can use. But yeah, it is, and that's why it's so industrial. That word industrial is so kind of key, I think, because it's all about using up the value and the energy that these people contained until it was gone, and you just replace them with more.
Yes, you've already stolen their houses, their curtains, their fur coats, their diamonds, and their money. Yeah. So now you use up their bodies. It was really quite something.
I was also reminded, and I remember this very vaguely, so forgive me, but it was a story that Stephen Fry told on Craig Ferguson. He was interviewed on, which is a late night comedy show in the States, but they had a quite serious interview, and Stephen Fry was talking about an Auschwitz survivor who he met, obviously much later in her life. I forget her name. She was a violinist, and she was taken in one day to see Joseph Mengele, and obviously the words just like send a shiver through her spine when she hears them. What is going to happen to me? Is the if you don't know, the infamous doctor who conducted disgusting medical experiments, and she was told to play the violin. She was shown a violin, play this. She had been like a concert violinist, and whatever she played this piece, and he just sat there. This dispassionate look on his face, and then she put it down, and she was dismissed, and that's it. And Stephen Fry says he asked her he didn't say thank you, and she's like, you don't understand. We weren't human. It's like thanking your toaster, right? And you see elements of that here. The only time that the Jews who are given enough freedom to work in the house, the only time that they're spoken to is to tell them off for it's when the wife is in a rage at one point because of the husband, and she takes out on the girl, is to tell them off for not having done something, or did you do this to offend me, clean that up. That's it.
Well, you see, the reason why I still have doubts about that is because there's the scene with the dresses where she says you're only allowed to take one to each of the servants. I don't think she would have done that if they were Jewish. I could be wrong. Possibly. Right? But anyway, there's that doubt about that that we have. But I want to raise, kind of another question, and a more difficult one, really, because I think what the film does is open up questions of people's complicitness with the horrors around them. It's clearly about that, So, these people know that their paradise is the result of what's on the other side of the fence. Yeah, one does not exist without the other. And they're benefiting from it, and they know what's going on. And of course, they allow it to happen. And of course, the reason why maybe they allow it to happen is because, kind of Jews are like toasters to them, right? But I think there are kind of broader questions about, ourselves and our own culture. And, this can be taken kind of, on different levels, the North versus the South, Africa and Europe, right? But also kind of, the current situation with Israel and Palestine, I think. And the film absolutely raises those questions for me. Did it for you?
Yeah, it is obviously so easily relatable to the current situation, although it's a situation that's been going on for decades and decades and decades. But obviously in the last few months, since Hamas attacked Israel and Israel retaliated so violently, it's much more evocative of that than it would previously have been, I suppose.
I mean, one doesn't want to draw the comparison too much because actually, there are no concentration camps in Israel. Well, there are no gassings and burnings and so on in Israel. So the comparison really has its limits. But, I've been watching Israeli friends and Palestinian friends post pictures on Facebook, right, of, what's happening kind of simultaneously. Yeah, and it really brings to mind this film, yeah, that kind of, one wall is like a garden and, the cabbages and so on, and the other side of the wall is like the chimney, right? Like,
yeah.
So, in some of those pictures of Palestine, you do see like those fences and where people have to go through to go get from one zone from the other. And the other, you are seeing kind of people having candlelight marches for the kidnapped victims and so on, but also, you're not seeing like a devastated war zone and kind of children kind of in pieces, and like you're seeing from some of the images from Palestine. So for me, kind of, maybe on a very, very crude level, as I said, one doesn't want to minimize the comparison. It's not comparable in many ways, but there are ways in which it is comparable.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it, that contrast really brings it to mind.
Yeah. You see videos of the IDF forces going into Palestinians' homes in the West Bank at night just to disrupt them. They're not doing anything wrong, but just to fuck with them, just to make sure they remain uncomfortable. Sometimes they arrest them and what have you. On top of that, it's oppression. It's a different kind of oppression. The oppression is not, as you say, in a concentration camp. Though there are definitely people who would say Gaza is just a concentration camp. It's just this isolated zone where Israel is completely in control. I mean, I agree with that to some degree.
I wanted to bring us back to the film,
yeah,
because I think, part of the reason why the film is so complex and interesting to me is actually maybe some of the scenes that I would normally have a knee-jerk reaction to, which are when the father is reading his daughter fairy tales and the image turns negative and you see images of a young girl, so it's tied to this theme of a young girl who puts sugar for, I don't know, the goblins or the witches or something like that. And then later you realize that actually it's a young Polish girl who's leaving apples for the Jewish prisoners to survive. Yeah?
Yes, we see this twice.
Yeah. And so the film also has, the negative image, or the image thrown to negatives, but of course, which is really hope in the film, of people doing the right thing, of people being human and compassionate and kind of, taking enormous risks to make someone else's life less hopeless.
Yeah.
Right.
That's the best image of the film for me, is when it's that shot of her planting apples or pears, or maybe she was even picking them at the time, whatever she's doing. And it's she's right in the centre of the frame, and there's a hill behind her, and behind the trees you see the smoke from one of the trains delivering prisoners to Auschwitz, and that's in pure white, and she's in pure white, glowing, and everything else is dark. As you say, it's kind of negative. It's almost like thermal imaging. It's interesting. I would look at how they made that imagery actually, because it's not completely clear to me. But that image is so powerful of just the business continues at the top of the screen, and it's this minor act of resistance that nonetheless is glowing.
And it's an act of resistance that's not without its complications, because another thing that you hear on the soundtrack is Jewish prisoners being shot because they fought over an apple. And this happens before she plants them, but you know, you make the connection. So on the one hand, she's helping them. Yeah, on the other hand, her helping them is not just a danger to herself, but a danger, you know, to them. But nonetheless, yeah, the helping in itself is important. Yeah.
Yeah. I was reading as well. It's in the kind of notes on Wikipedia that girl was a real girl who Jonathan Glazer met during his research. This became, as I say, kind of historical documentarianism to some degree for him. And the bicycle that girl uses is her own. It's that woman's actual bike, and so is the dress that she wears. So this was a real act. She was a member of the Polish resistance. She was 12 years old at the time, and so it's unconnected to anything else that we see in the film. She's not, you know, a member of this family. She's just from the area, but she is the kind of the bright spark that we get amongst all of this.
Yeah, it's really kind of an important dialectical element, because you know what you see is the film build up little by little details of these people who seem human and ordinary really becoming the epitome of like selfish wickedness, right? You know, inhuman wickedness. And so I think that it's important that we also see acts of humanity and compassion and selflessness. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, let me just get her name quickly. Her name was Alexandria. The other thing we get, of course, is the piece of music, which we were just remarking upon when we were walking back just now, because I stuck through the credits and I wanted to find out I wanted to find out who did the ice sculpture of the swastika that we get at that party at the end, which we don't get. Whoever that ice sculptor was is not named. It may just come under props. I also was interested in the music, and so she gets this scrumpled up sheet music and she plays it on the piano. It's just a simple melody, one note at a time, and the melody's playing, and we get subtitles beneath it. In fact, it's interesting. The subtitles for the whole film's in German. We should maybe say the whole film's in German, and a bit of Polish, and all the subtitles are in white. And when that song plays, the subtitles are in kind of cream, right? They're different at that point, and we were discussing whether we heard lyrics or not under it, because I thought it was interesting that you heard no lyrics, but subtitles played on top of it, and I took that to mean maybe this is a piece of music that local audiences would know and would associate those lyrics with, and we just are being giving them as an English audience. But apparently not. This was a real piece of music that this prisoner named Joseph Wolf, who survived the war, wrote. This Alexandria actually found this music, and I think this is what's being played, because in the music credits we get I forget the name of the piece, but it's named and it says written by Joseph Wolf, and then it also says an audio recording of Joseph Wolf was used, and I was thinking, oh, that's interesting. I didn't hear a voice, I didn't hear lyrics, and you were suggesting you heard.
I heard a voice at the beginning, I think.
You think you heard
but I'm
humming.
unsure. Yeah, but definitely no singing of lyrics, yeah.
Like humming.
Yeah.
So maybe I just missed that, and that's why that's credited. Either way, that's very interesting, and the song is about resistance and hope, and not really having any, but it's in the face of, this kind of insurmountable evil. But yeah, it's very interesting. It's a really interesting kind of, it's almost a flourish, if you like. I mean, the closest this film gets to a kind of flourish, maybe, in kind of audiovisual terms, that it is playing a song that it's giving us lyrics to without hearing them. Making sure that we know what this song is about.
It's an element of art and music and hope and belief in the human heart in the face of all of those lacks, right? And so, as the film inexorably builds, kind of, more and more and more and more, right? The girl and the song, which are tied together, kind of offers kind of a necessary corrective to, what could seem unremitting kind of horror, really. So, because the film builds with this idyllic image, and then, it becomes like an image of selfishness and greed and nastiness and Yeah, so I think, the girl and the song work together to say, well, amidst all of this, which overwhelms everything, there's still this that is, a better, more hopeful kind of sentiment. It hasn't extinguished it.
I want to talk about the ending as well before we stop, because it is so interesting, and I suppose you could also call this a flourish. In fact, it's maybe unfair of me to think of the film not having flourishes, because actually that shot I mentioned, that whole aesthetic of the inverted imagery is a flourish to some degree.
Yes, and the flowers.
So I'd take it back to some degree, but I think you know what I mean. The ending. So we've got Höss in near Berlin, in the town.
I think it's Oranienburg.
Oranienburg, thank you. We've got Höss there, having been told he's going back to Auschwitz to oversee Operation Höss, which is this mass movement of Hungarian Jews to the camps. He's very proud that it's been named after him. We also see him absent-minded, or describing absent-mindedness at that party, where he talks about standing above all these people who are milling about in the ballroom, and he was just absent-mindedly thinking about what it would take to gas this room, and it would be so difficult because the ceiling's so high. Like, his job is just on his mind all the time. Because I don't think to me, the implication from that isn't I hate these people and I must, I regret everything I do.
He's a technocrat.
It's just he's just thinking about the job. This is what he's been doing for years. It's what he's good at, and that's kind of where his mind goes, I think. But then we finish the film with him walking through these halls on his own, these corridors, walking downstairs, and he stops and he vomits, and then we cut to modern day Auschwitz, essentially documentary footage of modern day Auschwitz, where we see all the caretakers and cleaners, the people who run Auschwitz, the volunteers I think who work there. I don't know if they're paid or not, but the people who run Auschwitz as a museum, cleaning the windows, the glass that houses, the countless shoes and crutches, and I don't think we see the hair, but I remember the hair very vividly from when I visited. People vacuuming. We see, as you mentioned, that corridor of all the photographs of so many people who are murdered there. And it was interesting. It reminded me of Waltz with Bashir, which was the Israeli. It was an animated film. It was animated in Flash from about 2008 or 9, and the whole thing is about the memories of what I think was Shabra and Shatila, if I've got the name right, which was I think they were camps in the 80s that Israel ran, and I think they just murdered an awful lot of Palestinians there. Though I am obviously very half remembering that, but that's what the film's about, and it's about remembering that and remembering what we did there and reckoning with that memory. But it's all done through this remove of animation. And then the film, right at the end, gives you real footage, documentary footage, what happened there, just cement, this was real, this happened. And I remember thinking at the time that I watched it, do we really need that? Did you not trust us to buy? But the longer I've gone after having watched that, the more I thought, no, you do really need that. You do really need, I think, at the end of this, to show this was real and we need to see this. So that's not what this film does. It doesn't show historical footage of concentration camps and of the Holocaust. It shows modern day footage of Auschwitz as it is now. This place is still here. Yeah. It's still being maintained. The memories are being maintained. It's like a gravesite, it is a gravesite, and that's kind of how it feels. And Höss and everything are long gone. The memories are still there, and I think it's kind of wrapped up in the idea that people still deny the Holocaust.
Yes.
And you need to see that this place is real and is there, and this isn't just a movie that we've made. This is real, and of course, to a Holocaust denier, that could still be a set, obviously. But to a reasonable person, it will hit them, I think, in the right way. The reality of it. And what I suppose is also interesting, and I'm not sure I totally bought, because I think it's as close as the film comes to sentimentalising its main characters, is we cut back to Höss for one last shot, and then he leaves the frame and the film ends, and he has this look on his face of, he's just vomited, and then we see this footage, and then
I'm not sure if he vomits, he retches.
He retches.
You don't see any evidence of...
Sure. And then he has this kind of vacant or 1,000-yard expression on his face, and then the film ends, and it is, I think, suggesting that it's a moment of realization of legacy, because he's obviously not. I mean, it's funny. It's that thing of the Kuleshov effect of you show the guy and then you show the thing and then you show the guy again, and it's what he's been looking at and that. And so the kind of implication, if you take it in very concrete terms, is that he's seen the future. And of course, that's not what it's saying, but it's an implication of a realization that there will be a future and people will look back on this and there's a legacy. I'm not sure because it's something that, like I say, comes close to sentimentalizing the.
I don't think it's sentimental. I think it's necessary. And again, I read the images differently because, you see those images in the museum and it's almost all women. Yeah, it's like cleaning ladies.
I noticed that too.
And so I immediately kind of, because I thought they were local workers, I immediately thought of the girls working.
So did I, yeah.
They're going about their business and it's now a museum and it's kind of institutional. And actually, it also doesn't quite get at the whole, it minimizes or tames or, contains the horrors of what took place there. I mean, I remember kind of, going to the museum with you, and there were two moments where I kind of lost it, and I thought I was inured to it, right? You're keeping kind of like a distance from things, really. And then, there was that moment where you saw the shoes, and I might be mistaken, but I think we see them in the film.
We see the shoes, definitely. In the film.
And there was like this really bright red platform shoes, right? In the middle of all these now grey or brown shoes. And like the immediate thought is, who was that lively woman? It must have been a really lively woman who wore shoes like that, right? And all of a sudden, like, you're not just seeing like this historic horror, you're thinking of a person. And actually thinking of a person is what kind of teared me up. So anyway, that's what I was thinking of, because the film has been careful kind of not to be so indirect whilst actually, kind of showing, because obviously there is that thing about like, what do they call it? Kind of concentration camp porn or something, right? That like it could be so many attempts at showing. Like poverty porn, like reveling in the imagery. And that's right, so I think the film is very careful to be indirect about it while showing things clearly, right?
Which I think is why it's so important that we don't visit Auschwitz. Basically throughout, it's not dramatized in that way.
That's right. And then when you're brought to it, you're brought to it in the present, and then kind of related to kind of something in the past, and almost like the worst bit of it. That's kind of, 700,000 people are now coming. So a massive figure. And I thought that kind of worked. So you say Kuleshov effect, where you imagine, of course, you do. Kind of you projecting in the space between these two images. But they're also operating in terms of the past, the present, and the future of that past that's just about to take place. The
future that Höss is imagining.
Well, what's about to come. How he's going to efficiently get rid of 700,000 people.
Oh, sorry, I see what you mean. Right, yes.
So I kind of throughout the film, I was wondering, how is this going to end?
Yeah, sure.
I couldn't imagine how it would end, and I thought actually that was a brilliant ending.
Yes, you certainly couldn't imagine, them all of a sudden dramatising the liberation of Auschwitz. It's not that kind of film.
It's not that kind of thing. I thought they might move back to Berlin or
end with like trial, and I don't know how his life ended. I think he was executed.
Well, actually, one of the things that I also liked very much about the film is that they don't tell you. It would have been quite easy to have put a slide at the end of the film saying the family lived on, blah blah. And
1.1 million Jews died at Auschwitz, and then it becomes a number.
Right. But if they would have done it about the person, it would have made it about the person. It's not about the person. So I thought those were all kind of really intelligent choices.
And actually, that imagery of the shoes and of the crutches and devices for the disabled, and to an extent, bookend the film with what I was saying about how it starts with picking out what we want from the people who've come there with the clothes that we want. You know, it's obviously not quite the same. People aren't picking out crutches, and people aren't picking out the photos on the wall. So, you know, what we see of Auschwitz at the end is not directly reflecting what we've seen at the start, but there's a feeling of it. It's like that's what's left of these people, and that's what you see in Auschwitz these days. And as you say, it's all these shoes and all the spectacles that you see are real, and they were worn by real people, and there are so many of them that, you know, it kind of, like, it could overwhelm you. I mean, I also remember the first time I went to Auschwitz, I overheard some people who are around my age, I was like 18 at the time, saying, you know, like, there were just too many of them. They just kind of weren't feeling. I mean, and to an extent, I suppose I was the same way. Like I say, I wasn't affected by Auschwitz the first time I went the way I was the second time. I didn't understand it to the same degree, and I wasn't kind of like emotionally or intellectually ready for it, I guess. So I understood what these guys were saying when they were saying, like, it was just loads of glasses. Like, I didn't get it, but, you know, it's like it overmade its point or something. But the second time I went, that was the point. You know, the amount, the overwhelming amount was the point. Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's a really, really great film, and it's one, you know, that I'll have to think about kind of a lot more, and that I'm sure will lead to, you know, tons of conversations, really, because, you know, it very much judges, right, and asks for responsibility to be taken. It has kind of a very, I think, ethical and moral stance, whilst, you know, respecting the difficulties of showing, right? So I would highly recommend that everyone see it.
Yeah, respect is such a key word. It's absolutely respectful of what it's showing and what it's dramatising and what it's not showing. And the fact that it doesn't show various things, you know, because as you say, we've seen so many Holocaust movies. We've seen so many movies set in and around concentration camps, especially Auschwitz. And that's something that stories that need to be told and things that need to be seen. But there is also a way in which that becomes cliche. It's the thing you do. It's the things that you see. As you were saying, there's no striped pajamas. You know, there's none of that here. And, you know, the film did have, obviously, as I was seeing in the credits, you know, historical advisors as to the realism of the clothing and so on. So, yeah, I'm sure it's also accurate in what it's showing. The cliche is not there. It's not about that. And I think, like, going back to what I was saying at the start, it's something that I just so associate with Jonathan Glazer. You think about a sci-fi film and the cliches involved in any kind of sci-fi, and just none of that is there in Under the Skin. You think about, you know, I can't even think what Birth is about. I mean, what kind of movie it is.
I've never seen it. So.
And these are films that, you know, I as I say, I haven't got on with all that well. Probably Sexy Beast, as I recall it, is his most accessible. It's his most conventional. This, I think, for me, is his best.
Yeah, I think so
easily.
Too.
It's wonderful.
So we highly recommend that people see it.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for listening. We are Eavesdropping at the Movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.